What's up, everybody? This is Grouchy Greg of allhiphop.com, and we have two very special guests we're about to speak with. One is former FBI agent Phil Carson, who investigated the entire situation surrounding Biggie Smalls and the possibility that former LAPD officers were involved in his murder, as well as filmmaker and documentarian Don Sikorsky, who has produced a new podcast called The Dossier. And I want to welcome them to All Hip Hop right now. How's it going, guys?
Hey, good. Good to see you.
Good. Likewise. Likewise. Good. Looking forward to having a great discussion with you. And so, just to get started, I wanted to talk to you both about the Dossier and what exactly the Dossier podcast is centered around. What's it all about?
I realized that Phil was an FBI agent who had worked out of the LA Field Division. And secondarily to that, I realized that he had investigated what at the time was called sort of a public corruption case, looking into whether LAPD officers were involved in the murder of Biggie. At the time that I found out that Phil had done this, he was still inside the FBI. So knowing anything about the FBI, FBI agents will not talk. They will not talk to the media. They will not talk to civilians. They won't talk to anybody. It just so happened, though, that Phil was retiring, and he said, "You know what? I'll sit down with you and I'll talk to you." And I think from what I wanted, right, is that I looked at this story and I've always felt there was a part of this story that sort of centered around common sense, right? And when you look at the murder of Big, what you really have to look at is these three different main stories. When Biggie is killed, a guy by the name of Russ Poole of LAPD's robbery homicide division gets the case. He tries to solve the case, and at every turn is sort of shut down by LAPD. He is pushed out of LAPD. He sort of is blackballed out of LAPD, and that is the first instance of this case where you started to see weird things happening, where he wanted to investigate different things. He wanted to run ballistics on a car that possibly, was at the murder scene, and the LAPD told him not to. So after Russ Poole is taken off the case, a number of years later, a guy by the name of Greg Kading takes on the case. And once Greg Kading takes on the case, he's part of this task force, and he starts to go down another avenue. And correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe this needs to be fact checked. Kading's basic theory is a guy by the name of Wardell Poochie Faust is the trigger man and kills Biggie, and Poochie Faust is dead. Conveniently, great, makes sense. He writes a book, he does a documentary, he does a TV series on Unsolved, right? And I think it's at that moment, after that show came out, that I would say the general public and everyone heads exploded on what happened here. I'm confused. Who's who? And the second part of this is what I realized is that the real information about what happened in this murder actually was with two different things. First, it was contained in all of the information that existed when Biggie's mom sued the city of Los Angeles, right? Perry Sanders and Rob Frank, the attorneys, they do a civil suit. And what happens when you do a civil suit, you're entitled to discovery, right? You can ask for discovery from the LAPD. In the process of asking for this discovery, a number of more information, more files, more, let's say it, evidence sort of trickled out. But the reason why no one knew about it is all of these legal documents in the civil trial are all sealed. They're under federal record. So in the midst of the civil trial, funny enough, and this is where I decided that Phil's story was worth telling, is as the civil trial is going on, Phil decides to open up what is considered Phil, you can correct me if I'm wrong, a public corruption case, correct? You said,
Yeah.
there's something here. I don't know what it is. And Phil admittedly will tell you he was not a fan of hip hop music. He was not,
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Yeah. And so for me, what the dossier is in its core is two things. It is one, the story of Phil's investigation and what he uncovered and why the LAPD obstructed justice in what he was trying to find out. And the second thing, what I tried to do is explain all of the information that exists that Biggie's mom has, that Biggie's lawyers have, that has never seen the light of day. And I can share some of that evidence that is part of documents that I was given, that only her lawyers have and the city of Los Angeles has. No journalist has it. And I can outline for you and sort of explain some of that stuff as we continue the conversation. So that's the dossier. That's how me and Phil came together. And then as I started to talk to Phil, you know, his story in itself is staggering. What could have happened to his career if certain things went wrong, and I'll let him pick up, you know, where I'm leaving you of the origin story of how the podcast came together.
So Phil, if we can get some backstory on you, you know, first off, you know, how did you come to the FBI, and you know, what particular training did you have to go through in order to, you know, become a certified FBI agent?
Yeah, I took a little different route, I think, than most people. I don't have a military background. I wasn't prior law enforcement. I'm not an attorney. I was a bond trader. I was a bond trader for 10 years out of college. And it was one of those things where, you know, one night, I'm watching a couple movies that involve, it was The Untouchables, and my, trying to think of what the other movie was I watched. But anyways, it's intriguing. People, I think, naturally are drawn to gangster, police, money laundering, illegal gambling, that kind of underworld. It's just interesting. And the movies that I was watching, it just got my intrigue. And I remember I was sitting at my desk when I was a bond trader with my partner, and I actually called up the CIA first, and just called an 800 number and asked if they were hiring. As crazy as that sounds, and they said no. And I said, all right, well, I'm going to give the FBI a call. So I called the FBI, and they asked me, like, oh, do you want to file a complaint? And I said, no. I said, I'm interested in becoming an FBI agent. I mean, as crazy as that is, that's honest to God how it happened. And thank God at the time, I was under this impression that, you know, do a couple interviews, what have you, maybe things work out, maybe things don't. I mean, I was very happy and making good money as a bond trader. Well, a year and a half later, after going through all different types of testing and the whole process, going through the interviews and things like that, I got a call and said, okay, here's your date to show up at the FBI Academy out in Quantico. And then at that time is when I went and told my bosses, and they were happy for me. And they said, if it doesn't work out, you know, you can always come back here. And I think what I had going for me was, when I was in college, I played a Division I sport. I was on scholarship. I was in a fraternity for 4 years. I was very active. So I did a lot of traveling, and come to find out later on in my FBI career, when I actually would interview prospective agents, is that's what they're really looking for. I mean, it's great to have a good resume on paper, but really what it boils down to as an agent is you've got to be able to talk to people and get them to talk to you and provide you information. So it doesn't matter how smart you are, if you don't have the personal skills to be able to, like, you know, relate to people, different cultures, all that kind of stuff, you won't make it as an agent. You may end up sitting at your desk and doing a lot of paperwork and filing for other people. But if you really want to be a lead agent and get out there and try to make cases, you've got to be able to talk to anybody and everybody and have some general knowledge in a wide variety of things. So whatever conversation you have with somebody, whatever intrigues them or whatever allows you to build a rapport with that person, you've got to be able to talk somewhat intelligently with that person. So that's how it all got started.
And what kind of cases did you investigate prior to becoming involved with the Notorious B.I.G. situation?
Well, I first did. Usually, new agents never usually go to public corruption because they're usually very high profile, very sensitive cases. So actually, I started off doing some bank fraud cases, and then I actually became, because I was kind of volunteering for anything and everything, just trying to, get in good with a lot of guys and stuff, a lot of other agents. One of them actually brought me over to the public corruption squad. And so after probably about a year, I started doing public corruption cases, and I did a lot of prison corruption, which meant inmates that were getting drugs, corrections officers that were bringing drugs in or involved in just some shady involvement with sometimes even female inmates and things like that. So I
And this
actually
was
did a
in
lot.
Los Angeles? This was in Los Angeles where you started?
It's all over California. I mean, mainly in Los Angeles, but a lot of times there was a guy on our squad, a senior agent, who ended up becoming my supervisor, who actually flew an airplane doing surveillance for like 10 years for the FBI. And so I would fly to different prisons throughout the state of California and investigate a lot of those cases. And then I did some other public corruption cases on some one case was a bad ATF agent, and then I got asked to be part of the Rampart case, which then everything kind of happened from there.
So with your beat, if you will, on the FBI, from the gate, you specialized in corruption. And so when you were assigned to investigate the Rampart scandal and the officers involved with the LAPD, you were already primed for that type of assignment. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Got it. And, from there, what happened? Because I know that the unit was called RamFit, and there were multiple agents involved. How did you start that investigation? And what was kind of the catalyst to spark the entire RamFit squad?
Well,
what particular crime?
Well, the way that it actually happened originally was Rafael Perez. This is before Rampart really even. I mean, there was no state or federal case on Rampart. Rampart was just another division within LAPD. Well, Rafael Perez got busted ordering out cocaine from an evidence locker, LAPD, and so when they brought him in, when they finally, in order to get him to talk, they gave him the deal of the century. I think he got, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years. But when they gave him that deal, they had no idea what he was going to tell them. They thought maybe that he was going to tell them about just some other bad stuff that he'd been involved with and some of the more cocaine that he'd been stealing out of the locker. Well, he throws out the bombshell about Rampart and about all these corrupt police officers and all the bad stuff they were doing, planting evidence, shooting unarmed people, ripping off drug traffickers. And this was not only going on with just Rafael Perez and his partner, who actually got caught up in the whole Rampart scandal, Nino Durden, but he gave us a list of, 40, 50 plus police officers that were all in Rampart. They were all part of this corruption. And once that happened, it no longer became an LAPD internal affairs investigation on Rafael Perez. Now you're talking about, civil rights violation, shooting unarmed people, plan, all that
So
sort
our
of stuff.
so our viewers know, Rafael Perez and Nino Durden. This was basically sparked by Nino Durden, the officer shot an unarmed gang member, if I'm not mistaken, and he framed him. And from there, the cocaine happened, $800,000 worth of cocaine out of the locker, and so that was the start of the whole Rampart. And for viewers who saw, in particular, Straight Outta Compton, the Rampart officers were the guys who would come through with the Batarams and knock your house down, and or was that the crash unit? Am I confusing those?
That was a crash unit within Rampart. Rampart was just like I don't know, what was it, like a 12 block or 16 block square area of part of Los Angeles. And then a lot of these officers worked in that area. And then it's basically all the information that Rafael Perez threw out, that he told the internal affairs when they gave him this sweet deal, because basically then he can tell them, he needs to tell them everything that's going on, just so he kind of covers his own ass, because they couldn't prosecute him for that stuff because of the cooperation agreement. The problem is he gave up all these officers, and that's what opened up the Rampart case federally, because now LAPD was not just looking at a police officer from an internal affairs standpoint. The feds now get involved because of all the civil rights violations that he caused. And in fact, the one main one that got everybody's attention was the Javier Ovando case, where Perez and Nino Durden shot him, planted a throwdown gun. They had shaved off the serial number on the gun. But at the time, nobody knew that was a bad shoot. When Rafael Perez came clean about that, and then Nino Durden came clean on it, that's what sparked the whole Rampart case.
What do you know about Frank Liga and Kevin Gaines? Because that situation also led to the discovery that there were some high-profile officers working at Death Row Records, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. So Kevin Gaines was an LAPD officer, and he was sleeping with Sharitha Knight, which is Suge's estranged wife at the time. So Kevin he's living with Sharitha Knight, and because of Sharitha's involvement with Death Row Records, Kevin Gaines had a good in with Death Row Records, and he starts getting his buddies, David Mack, Rafael Perez, Sammy Martin, all these other guys, these side jobs to work security for Death Row Records. Well, what happened one day is Kevin Gaines is driving his car, and he pulls up next to another car with a white guy who looks like he's a narcotics dealer or something. Okay, it was Frank Liga, but Kevin Gaines didn't know that was Frank Liga, and Frank Liga didn't know that was Kevin Gaines. They were both LAPD officers at the time. Something happens between the two of them. Kevin Gaines brandishes his gun at Frank Liga. The light turns green, and Kevin Gaines takes off. They stop at a light a little further down, and again, Kevin Gaines does something where he's trying to pull his gun up, like he's trying to show some bravado or this tough guy image. And as he does that, Frank Liga beats him to the punch, and he pulls his gun out and he shoots Kevin Gaines. And Kevin Gaines ends up crashing his car into, I think it was a gas station, and he dies. And from that, they put Frank Liga through the coals. He went through, I want to say, like 5 or 6 Board of Rights hearings. But the big thing is with Kevin Gaines dying, that was their big in with Death Row Records at the time for some of these officers, like the Max and Perez's and stuff like that. So what everybody believes, the reason that Rafael Perez started ordering out, or basically stealing this cocaine out of the evidence locker of LAPD, was originally a couple of the cases were Frank Liga's cases. That was Rafael Perez's way of getting back at Frank Liga. Frank Liga did nothing wrong. He was cleared of everything, but they still ruined that guy's career. But that was way for Rafael Perez to get back at Frank Liga for killing Kevin Gaines and kind of being there in with Death Row Records and doing all the security stuff and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, so Rafael Perez, his infractions rose to the federal level, and you were investigating those types of civil rights violations, and that's what RamFit was working to uncover, if I'm summarizing that correctly, right?
Oh, you're correct. Yep.
And so now, how did you discover or even come across anything relating to the incident involving Biggie Smalls at the Peterson?
Well, at that time, so I was paired up with an LAPD officer. There was to kind of show you how the whole once the internal affairs investigations of Rafael Perez started, and that's when he started cooperating, and that's when we started finding out about all these civil rights violations, and RamFit was opened up, and that was run out of the FBI office, and that's where you had 5 FBI agents that were paired up with 5 LAPD detectives, and then there was a lieutenant from the LAPD that actually sat in the FBI office. And so we were all assigned different cases based on the allegations that Rafael Perez provided. And again, you're looking at 40, 50, 60 police officers where there's all these types of allegations of misconduct by these officers. So each pair, like me and my partner, we would get certain cases and we look at it. And then we would have obviously group meetings. Everybody would share what they found out or what kind of cases they were working, and things like that. So from working the Rampart investigation, and slowly but surely, the Rampart or RamFit on the federal side, it started getting pared down, and it was myself and an FBI friend of mine who I worked other cases with. At the end, it was just the two of us. The lieutenant from LAPD was gone. All the LAPD detectives, they were then gone, and it really came down to just myself and my FBI partner, and then we had a supervisor that oversaw it. So I was there to the very end.
And you guys secured hundreds of convictions were tossed out because of your investigations. Isn't that correct?
Well, a lot of what happened is all the cases that Rafael Perez was involved in, or Nino Durden was involved in, because they both pled guilty, those all got thrown out. And I want to say LAPD probably paid out, I want to say close to $100 million, I think was the total from, all the different cases. And I remember, I think I don't know if it was 18 or 20 or 22 million or something like that was paid to Javier Ovando. And that was he was like the poster child, if you will. Yeah, we started looking at all these cases, and LAPD still doing their internal affairs. So some officers were getting fired, some officers were getting reprimanded, some officers were resigning before they got charged or got disciplined by internal affairs. But the whole Rampart thing was just a mess, to be honest.
And so
with you.
what specific thing jumped out at you during this investigation, again, that introduced you to Biggie Smalls?
It was just the rampant corruption that was going on. And what was interesting is a couple of the police officers that were on that list that were part of the Rampart investigation that we really never got an opportunity to look into. I got called in by my boss one day and said, "Hey, Phil, I've got something here for you." And one of the police officers, an LAPD officer that was working in Rampart, that was actually involved in a shooting while at Rampart that we were questioning, had just been busted by trying to buy 10 kilos of cocaine from an undercover DEA officer down in San Diego. His name is Ruben Palomares. And because of my knowledge of the Rampart investigation and the AUSA that was heading up the Rampart investigation, I had done a lot of other cases with her. She was going to be the lead AUSA on this new case. And my boss, he wanted me to work that. So that's how I got involved in the Ruben Palomares case. So I had the knowledge of Rampart that was going on and all the officers there. I then get assigned the Ruben Palmeros case, and the two main ringleaders of the Ruben Palmeros case, which are Ruben Palmeros and an LAPD officer named Bill Ferguson, they also both were on our radar in the Rampart case, but we never really got to really look into them. So between the Rampart case and then fast forward after working the Palmeros case, and then a good friend of mine that worked the David Mack bank robbery case, I had a lot of good knowledge on all these cops, all the corruption that was going on, how they were doing it. And then again, one day I'm watching the Biggie documentary. And like I've said before, I had no idea who Biggie Smalls was. I'll be honest with you. I really didn't. But I'm channel surfing and they're talking about the Biggie case. They talk about LAPD officers.
What year was this that you discovered this?
I want to say I think it was like sometime in 2002.
Okay.
I think it was sometime in 2002.
So this is before the civil suit.
Yeah. When I first opened up the Biggie case, I knew nothing about a civil case. I don't even think the civil case had even been filed. I don't know.
And you hadn't even heard about, because Biggie was murdered in March 9th, 97. You had never even really heard about the incident or the murder of this famous rapper?
No. No.
That's fine. I'm just getting clarification.
Yeah, no, I wasn't up to speed on the whole hip hop scene, but at the same time, I love documentaries. I love just seeing what's on TV, what's popular, whatever. And I was kind of mesmerized by the whole documentary of Biggie, the whole music scene, hip hop, police officers. They're going over all this stuff. And while I'm watching this and they're starting to talk about some of the information, the evidence, I'm going, no, that's not correct, because I know what went on in these other police corruption cases, because they're trying to come up with theories, or people are coming up with their own theories of what might have happened or who was involved and who might have committed the murder and all that sort of stuff. And that's when I started thinking, like, no, I kind of know what's going on here. And so
when you saw that, real quick, when you saw that documentary, did they name or mention Rafael Perez and David Mack? And if so, because of your prior investigations, did this, really set off alarm bells for you as, something that should be really looked into?
You know what? I don't know if they actually mentioned those police officers then. I can't recall. Or when they talked about the LAPD corruption, and they might have mentioned those two officers because of their whole Rampart involvement. And I think there initially were allegations that the police might have been involved in it. That's when I wrote up a long communication to my boss. It must have been 8 or 10 pages long. And I went through everything with them. And normally when I'm working my prison corruption cases, I'm not working with other agents that are working, say, a corruption case against LA sheriff or something like that. But because I was involved with the Rampart case, the Palmeros case, and I had knowledge of the David Mack bank robbery case, I was able to kind of put it all together, saying, like, no, there's a pattern here, and it's not a good pattern, and it involves corrupt LAPD officers, and the same names are coming up. And so that's when I sat down with my bosses. And again, if they didn't think there was something there and they didn't think it was worth investigating and understanding, this isn't just your run of a mill, I don't know, bank fraud case where, like I say, like a teller steals money out of the till or something. When you're talking about going after potentially corrupt police officers, that's real high profile. It's like going after a senator or a congressman, where based on these allegations, if they're not true, you don't want to ruin somebody's career. The last thing in the world that I would ever want to do is ruin a good cop's career on some bullshit allegation that somebody made up. So you got to be real particular, and you got to have enough information to where a lot of times what they do is they open up what's called a preliminary investigation. So it's not a full field case yet. Well, I was able to dig up enough information, and with the knowledge I had from these other cases, to where when I went in and I presented this to my bosses, it wasn't a preliminary investigation. It was a full field investigation, case number, title, everything. And just, started running with the ball then.
And what were the first set of facts that, you were using to, come to the conclusion that, well, let me back up. Let me ask you this question. How did Rafael Perez and David Mack really intersect? Because their cases were obviously different. Were they both part of Rampart, or is their only connection the fact that they were both supposedly connected to the Bloods and moonlighting with Suge?
No, they were both connected to the Rampart. I mean, Rafael Perez, when you say the Rampart case, the first thing everybody will come to their mind is Rafael Perez. I mean, he was the face of that case. David Mack, while they were at Rampart, David Mack actually shot somebody, and he claimed that it's because that person was about ready to shoot Rafael Perez. So Rafael Perez has always felt this connection to David Mack or indebted to him, because basically they're saying that David Mack saved Perez's life. Well, then you find out about the allegations, and they come true regarding Rafael Perez's involvement with all the corruption that was going on there. David Mack was on our radar screen for Rampart, and then next thing you know, he's getting arrested for doing a bank robbery while an LAPD officer. So immediately, those two people, regarding the whole Biggie thing, I think it's only natural to look at not only what's already happened in these other cases, but the corruption of those officers involved in those cases. Could they potentially be involved in the Biggie case? Now, that doesn't mean to say that those were people that I instantly was just looking at. I was looking at anybody and everything. I wanted to get as much info as I could. Because again, I don't believe two police officers could have even pulled off the Biggie murder. No way. There's too much.
You don't believe two police officers couldn't have or could have?
No, I think they were part of it, but it would have taken more than two, without question.
So you believe that Mack and Perez may be the only two who are accused of helping to orchestrate it, but there was support from other corrupt officers who have not been named yet?
I believe so. And again, I think you can look back look at all the corrupt police officers that are part of Rampart, and nothing ever on the federal side. Oh, let me even backtrack. On the state side, Perez and Nino Durden were the two that got hit the hardest. On the federal side, those are the only two cops that got charged federally, which that's a whole nother discussion about how ridiculous that is. But we all know that there's way more than two police officers that were involved in corruption while inside of Rampart. Well, we also know from the bank robbery that there were more accomplices with David Mack, but he's never come clean on that. And we know there were getaway cars and there were getaway drivers. And then in the whole Palmeros case, again, you've got the two main officers involved that were part of Rampart.